So this is episode 5, right? We were talking about it earlier. We weren't really sure if we're up to like 4 or 3 or 2.
Or one. No, this is
Well,
episode
this
5.
is the 5th episode. So, yeah, glad to be back here. What's it been, a few weeks?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been great coming off the episode with Drew.
So, yeah, now we're here interviewing Arnie from the Grateful Living podcast. But before we get into that, just want to go over a few of the things that we have going on with Read and Retire. Right now, we are about a few chapters in for the Everything Store, the Jeff Bezos book, which I guess makes a perfect sense, going that he actually went to space.
Yeah.
And also most likely got lip fillers. We won't be talking about that, or face fillers, I think, too. I don't know if you saw his face. It looked kind of puffy before he actually went.
I didn't. I did not see that.
But yeah, so we're working on that now. We'll have videos up as usual in every Sunday. And yeah, so we wanted just to announce that we're going to be moving on from like a weekly book club session to more of a monthly session. And just because we have another project that we're really excited to be working on, seeing if we can actually take the things that we've been learning and actually put it out there in real life. Before, I guess COVID kind of made everything, have to be virtual. But now that things are opening up, I think it makes perfect sense to actually put these things into the community and see if we can affect people in person as opposed to just doing Zoom calls. So, oh, yeah. And if you've noticed, we're not actually in our normal location. We're actually in Boston.
Shout out to Beantown.
Let's go.
Yeah, these guys went to school here. But I think at this point, since I've been here so often, I'm almost a resident. I gave somebody directions today.
Hey,
Yeah,
let's
he gave
go.
somebody directions today, which is funny.
which is crazy. So now I just leave it up to Dave. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so I'm excited to be here, like Orlando said, back in Boston for the a millionth time since graduating from Boston College. But it wouldn't be right if we came to Boston and we didn't get to talk to one of my really good friends that you see here, Arnie, or Arnav Roy. And so I first met Arnie when we were actually in school together, and I met him through Rosh, who, of course, Rosh is Master Connector.
Crypto Bobby.
Yeah, from episode 2. But they were friends, and he introduced me to Arnie, and we immediately clicked. And I think for me, the two things that I like the most about Arnie is just one, his personality. You're just a people person through and through, and I think everyone always knows when you're in the room, which is awesome, and you're super cool to be around. But then two is just your innate interest in helping others, and I think that that's the main reason why we were able to connect, just because I think you always think of everybody else first. Sometimes not even yourself, and so I think that's in part why me and Orlando do this work, just to try and be a blessing to other people. And when it comes to helping people, I think one of the biggest areas, especially when it comes to finances, one of the biggest areas that people don't really talk about is the mental aspect of it, and mental health, and how that can really impact your finances and the trajectory that you're going on in life. And so last year, Arnie started a mental health platform called Grateful Living, while obviously working full time, and we'll talk a little bit more about what he does. But he started it during the pandemic about 16 months ago. And today you have over 45,000 video views, 3,000 podcast plays, and over 30,000 views on Instagram. And so
Big boy numbers.
It's just
Big boy numbers, Dave.
It's just been amazing because we often talk about essential workers, and I consider you an essential worker because of the work that you do.
Wow, thank you.
No, it's especially now during COVID, because we recognize how much of a mental stress that has put on people and how much wellness is needed during this time. And so I also before coming on, I was able to just really look into it a lot more. I heard a lot of stats about it, but just to set the perspective, it said during the pandemic there was a larger than average share of young adults between 18 and 24 who reported increased symptoms of anxiety or depression. 56% they're more likely to report substance abuse, 25% versus 13% pre-pandemic, and then suicidal thoughts, up to about a quarter of young adults versus about 10% before. And so with all that being said, I felt like today's episode should be all about mental health and finances. And so I wanted to make sure to bring on nobody else other than Arnie. So welcome.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Lando. It's an honor to be on, and love what you guys are doing. I've had them on my podcast as well. If you guys want to go check that out, if you haven't already, like I've said, their book club has been very helpful to me in terms of finance and just increasing my knowledge, I think you guys know this, but financial literacy is something that's still not taught in school. You got to figure all that stuff out by yourself, whether it's credit cards or investment, ideas and things of that nature, which is quite a shame. So hopefully your platform can help educate others and put themselves in better financial positions for the future.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it was a blessing to be on your podcast as well. Just to kind of talk a little bit about, the work that we're doing and how we've been just trying to be a blessing to the community. And so I wanted to start off by just, hearing a little bit about yourself, hearing more about Grateful Living and pretty much what inspired you to create the platform.
Yeah. So, I think basically the Grateful Living started in March of 2019. I unfortunately lost a friend to suicide. And, one of the things that happens in tragedies is, right, we mourn for a small period of time and then we move on. And that tends to be the, narrative. And so one of the things for me was, this was someone I knew. It was someone that went to BC. I spent 2 years with him. We had very deep conversations. I wasn't like a close best friend, but, during our time here, we were pretty good friends. And so, I knew, and especially as someone who's dealt with mental health troubles, in hindsight, looking back, I've dealt with mental health, probably depression and anxiety since I was 13. But as someone that deals with it, that hit home to me. And I've, prior to that, I've been, I would say suicidal, but like not, I didn't actually, get the means to do it prior, March of 2019, but definitely had my times in high school and college where I, was in that place. So, for me, I knew that I wanted to do something. And so I actually just started, in August of that year, I just posted on my personal social media pages and just said, like, if anyone wants to talk, I'm happy to do so. I called them life talks, and I was like, this was my way of being like, I've dealt with mental health troubles. If anybody else out there needs to talk about it, I'm here, and things of that nature. And actually, in September of that year, this is 2019, I started a part-time MBA at Babson. And one of the things that Babson emphasizes is entrepreneurial thought and action. And so what that means is looking at the world with, the problems that are out there. There's opportunity in that and in solving that. And that's where, Babson's a huge entrepreneurial school. And that's how they taught us how to think about problems, look at the opportunity in the problems. And so I said, this is a huge issue. Even now for people ages 10 to 34, and this is 2019 CDC data, suicide is the second leading cause of death. So there was clearly a problem here. And, for me, I thought about what was the best way to do that. And so, I was just like, let me start a podcast. A lot of people have long commutes, whether that's train, car, bus ride, walk, whatever. We all tend to listen to something on our way there, whether it's a podcast or music. Let me just bring up different mental health topics of my own that I feel like, I've gained some knowledge on. And so that's what it started out with. This is my iPhone, audio, and the first four are just audio. And, that's what I talked about. I talked about my advice on mental health, talked about career pressure, things of that nature. And then I slowly realized, I only had my story, right? And so, for example, being African American in the U.S., I can't speak on that. Coming out as a lesbian, I can't speak on that. All these other topics that I don't have the knowledge base of. How do you get the knowledge? You interview people. And so that's when I started. Thankful, to Obi. He was my first guest, and he was a BC alum as well. But it started from there, and just trying to gather learn from people's journeys in different walks of life through a mental health lens. Really get to know the person and the profession. And unfortunately, in July of 2020, so I started in March of 2020. July of 2020, I lost another friend of mine, this time from high school, to suicide. And that's really when I started taking it a lot more seriously. I think prior to that, I was posting 3 times a week and things of that nature. After that, I started going 7 times a week and things of that nature. So hopefully that was a long-winded answer, but gives you a little background on starting Grateful Living.
No, that was a perfect answer, man. I think I'm a big fan of your podcast, and I think that it's very important and something, like you said, it's very necessary, because people don't really have like places they can go to feel to actually deal with the things that they're feeling, especially in the communities that we want to help out financially, the minority communities, because there's always like crazy stigma when it comes to like therapy and stuff like that. So where's your stance on it? How do you feel like on like when it comes to like mental health issues? Like, what do you think like the purpose of therapy? Should everybody go to therapy? What do you think is the
I think the important thing is first self-awareness, and knowing how you're doing. And that's tough, especially if you're not doing well, because you're not the best judge of that. But I mean, in general, I would recommend therapy. If you're someone that doesn't, isn't open to that, I would first say try it out once. And then if you don't like it, obviously don't do it. But and in that situation, I would recommend, journaling, self-help books, peer support groups. If you can, form any, and just like AA, meetings or something like that, you can do one with your best friends or something like that. But for me, I think therapy is great. It gives you a third person perspective on what you're doing. And someone that can also, who's smart enough to be able to process, your past, to be able to tell you, what the actions that you're taking, maybe why you're taking them, right? So if you're currently in a relationship, and in a previous relationship you were cheated on, right? And you're now in a relationship where you're complaining, or you're talking about trust issues because they did that or they did this. A therapist can say, like, listen, Lando, don't you think the way you're reacting is in part because of a previous time, and that's why you're really on your guard about things and things of that nature, and that'll give you the third person perspective to be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's true. That probably did have an effect on me in the way that I'm behaving. The environment, I mean, is everything, as you guys probably see in the financial world, and why you're targeting minorities. If they're not given an education, they're not going to do well financially. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's the whole thing. So, I mean, I would definitely recommend therapy. Or the other means of if you don't end up liking that.
I think it's like you said, third person, the objectivity of it all. Having somebody who can look at your past and then connect dots that you can't see because you're too into it. It's like when you have like a what is it, one of those, I think like those picture like sort of things, and they tell you, all right, find this, find that, but you're looking too closely. So once you get like the zoom out version, I think a therapist they have insight that allows you to actually see that and see what steps you need to take to fix things.
Yeah.
100%. And actually train to do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're like a lot of times if you go to like a licensed professional, like that's their job. And so I truly believe that the world would be a better place if everyone had that objective person. Like, imagine everybody was forced to talk to somebody about, how they're feeling, whether emotionally, financially, mentally, spiritually, and they knew that the person was an objective observer who wasn't going to judge them. I feel like people would be like a lot better on. So I completely agree with that. And I also think it was cool how you said that you pretty much started Grateful Living because of the entrepreneurial education that you were able to get from school. I think that that's pretty dope, because I think a lot of times people, there's a lot of things that people look, bad at school for. One of those things for me is like the lack of financial education. But I do think that there are some mindset shifts that you can get and pick up from school as well, because everything's a learning opportunity. And so I think that the idea of being able to take a look at the entrepreneurial route was huge for you. And I think that kind of sparked you to start this, because you really looked at just what's a problem. And I think because it was something that hit home for you, I think that it was easy for you to make that transition. And so I wanted to jump next to kind of talking a little bit. Orlando brought this up earlier, but a little bit more about just stigmas. And so I think in the Black community, I've never been to a therapist before. Orlando has never been to a therapist before. I think that there are a lot of stigmas around it in the Black community, primarily around like, toughen up mentality. You deal with things on your own. How do you think, first of all, I wanted to see if you think that there are any stigmas in some minority communities. And then two, how do we begin to kind of break some of those down?
There's 100% stigma in minority communities. And, I think, the main thing is really not showing your emotions or showing that it affects you. But it's impossible for it not to affect you, right? If you have a family death, or if you have a family member that's, addicted to something, or, whatever the situation may be, a lot of the times we feel like we can just, go through life and it not affect us. But it's going to affect you in some way or another. Whether you decide to process or not is your choice, but that's going to have a tangible effect on your life in some way, some capacity. So, for me, I think, having conversations among friends, especially among males, I think is of where you have spaces to talk about feelings and things of that nature, is something that people definitely should implement. Even, I said that, we lost someone to suicide in July of 2020. So it's been a year. We had a Zoom call with our, close friends of his. And this was the first time after a year we decided to talk about our feelings, about how we're processing it. And it felt really good because people opened up about, their fears, their guilt, and things of that nature. I would say that's the first thing is creating spaces where you can at least talk about things and not be just superficial about sports and things of that nature. I think creating those spaces allows you to then, maybe not process at the level of a therapist, but at least decompress and say, yo, Lando, this happened to me today. What are your thoughts on it?
No, that's very important. And I feel like when it comes to stigmas, a lot of it starts from you and your network. And like having a friend group, we have to make it acceptable to talk about these things. And I think we have to make it okay. And I think that that's probably one of the places we lack at the most, is just giving people the opportunity to be open-minded to what something could be different. And I think that the reason why a lot of times we approach things like that is because a lot of times we come from a scarcity mindset too, where like we think certain things are not within our reach. And so we're only focused on the limited experiences that we have in life, regardless of what other people might have actually done or might have actually perceived. Because there's millions of people who would say, I've actually been to therapy and it's worked great for me. There are some people who will say, I've been to therapy and it hasn't. But a lot of times we only come from one perspective. And a lot of times, I think, especially in the Black community, we have been told, wrong information or different things from different groups of people. And so I think that's why it's important, to also keep those into account too.
I have to know that money isn't going to make you feel any better. And we've seen it like time and time again, where people with like unlimited access to wealth or like a lot of wealth, they still struggle. They still harm themselves. They still commit suicide and put themselves in situations where they're not going to actually get any better. So I'm just wondering, as we grow financially, as our assets increase, as our bank accounts increase, what are some of the things you think we should do to preserve our mental health and even improve it? Because I remember I saw this video with Jordan Peterson. He said if you had like $1 million today, what would happen is you just screw yourself over faster. So what do you think are like some of the things we can do as our wealth increases?
Yeah, so first I would say, one thing, at least from my perspective, a caveat on that is, if you're working minimum wage or you're working a pretty low wage job, I understand that hearing that statement is going to be tough.
Yeah.
Because, if you're struggling to pay rent, if the job, or you have two jobs, and you're a single mother with two kids, I mean, hearing that obviously is not a statement they're going to agree with, because, for them, extra money would mean working less or things of that nature. And so in that realm, especially what you guys do, that's where entrepreneurship is so important, and getting people in power that are providing good jobs. And that's a real, I know that entrepreneurship gets a bad rap. As much as people loved Bezos, there was a whole sector of people that hated him for spending billions of dollars on space exploration rather than, maybe distributing that income to millions of people in America. Well, if you want to complain about that, then do something, become the next Bezos, and you can do that. What Bill Gates and what Melinda Gates are doing with their foundation, they are helping millions of people like with clean water and things of that nature. They're using their money for good.
And scholarships too.
Yeah. So that's the first thing. I would say, if you're in that lower wage place, I would say it's okay to complain. And I would just say, self-care is very important, and taking time as much as you can. And then education is important as well. Going online and seeing how you can upskill, or reskill, your skills to see, what jobs are available if you do, something or another in terms of, a lot of tech jobs now. I had Ruben Harris from Career Karma. A lot of tech jobs now, they're just requiring a high school graduate degree. You don't need to be college educated. They're going to put you in a course, and granted, you're going to have to take the time after work. It's not going to be easy, but you're going to have to take the time. If you go through that course over a year, suddenly you can start making 70 to 100 after a year or two of taking part-time classes. So, I mean, I would definitely educate yourself. Tech industry is a great place to go to. But in terms of, as your money increases to a certain point, I forget what studies say, but like after $70,000, I think that, happiness doesn't increase as much. I think the main thing is again, self-awareness in knowing, are you living your life the way you want to as much as you can? And that's the biggest thing, and a lot of people, once they start making a lot more money, they start purchasing things to show off to others. What's the point of that? And I think you guys talk about this a lot, assets over liabilities, and Nipsey talked about this a lot, but like, rather than, buying a Tesla, why not buy a house? Invest that. That's going to be reoccurring income for the rest of your life. The Tesla is not going to give you any income. Yeah, a girl might like it, or a guy, whatever. But, you want your, as you say, assets over liabilities. Investing the money you make, and of course, Earn Your Leisure talks about this often. The amount of money you take minus, your basic expenses, as much of the rest of that you can invest and make more money. As we talked about the nature of inflation and prices increasing every year, you need to be investing for your purchasing power to stay the same. So I don't know if I answered that, Lando, but That was a long-winded
No,
way
no,
of
no, no,
answering
no,
something.
It was, it was fine. Yeah, I think like just like you said, um, if you're in a lower income situation, you should probably try your best to probably get out of that, so you have more money and more freedom of choice. But it's like I was just curious to see like once you get to that, I guess that $70,000 dollar point or whatever point it is. What are some things that people could do to keep their mental health intact? Because in reality, you can be depressed and anxious and make like minimum wage, or you can be depressed and anxious and be a millionaire.
I mean, continue to do what makes you happy.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing in life. I mean, I think so many people are, and don't compare yourself to other people. Just be your authentic self. Dave knows this and Lando knows this too, but like I'm a huge Celtics fan. And so like I love the Celtics. And so, the last two playoff years that they had fans, 2019 and 2021, I bought tickets to those games and not necessarily cheap seats. But that's just me. I love the Celtics. That makes me happy. I think everything that you're doing, you should be thinking about, is this making me happy or am I doing it to impress others? That's the biggest thing. I mean, are you buying that BMW because you actually like, the car and the craftsmanship of the car, or are you buying it so that everybody can be like, oh, Dave's got a BMW, because at the end of the day, if it's just for other people, it's not going to make you happy. It's got to be for you. And if you like the car and you want it, then it'll make you happy. I think that's the biggest thing is people do stuff just to impress others. They travel just to, post on Instagram or whatever. Do the things that make you happy. And I think you'll be fine.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I feel like I still believe in the the era of like becoming like more money, more problems. I think as you get more money, like you will have more problems. It just kind of comes with it. The problems just tend to be bigger because the money you make are bigger. So you're dealing with more cash that you can lose on your problems. But I feel like, and there's also a lot of rich people, that who have talked about this recently. Like, you think about LeBron James, you think about Naomi Osaka, Simone Biles, like not joining the Olympics because of like mental health reasons. A lot of times, like the money is there, their physical ability is still there, like they can still do everything, but they're just not there. They're not checked in mentally, and because of that, like a lot of their it does affect your money because. For a lot of if you're an NBA player or whatever, if you can't step on the court, you don't get played. If you don't play, you don't really get paid. And so you have to show up to those events and you have to perform. If you're a rapper, there's a number of rappers like you think about, Mac Miller, DMX, like even Tekashi 6ix9ine, like Kendrick Lamar. These are all some artists who have talked about going through like mental health challenges, substance abuse, anxiety, depression, those kind of things. And it's like, some of them have passed on. But we recognize that even though you make more money, like it doesn't really change unless you do some of those things that you mentioned, I think, which is like making sure that you're surrounding yourself with good people. You have self-awareness. You're able to get the help and seek the help when you need it. And those kind of things are important.
I would add prioritize self-care. That's the biggest thing. I mean, that's the one thing people don't understand. For you to get the highest performance out of yourself, you need to generally be at your best. There's a reason LeBron James doesn't play 48 minutes a game for 82 games. He needs to make sure his body is rested and, well kept and not injured going into the playoffs. And, you mentioned those artists. I mean, Avicii was probably the number one DJ at one time in the world. And, one of the things I'll give him credit for, he realized his travel schedule and his show schedule was too crazy. I mean, he was doing like 250 to 300 shows a year. And to his credit, he realized, listen, this is terrible for my mental health. And he stopped doing shows. He was just doing music. But even in that scenario, you see, even then, sometimes it just gets the best of you. If you're not making it a priority and if you're not enjoying, the hours and your time.
No, I couldn't agree more. And so what do you think what can someone do if they think a friend or family member is suffering from mental health challenges?
I mean, the first thing, obviously, recommend them to a mental health professional. Definitely. I mean, second, I would, depending on what type of situation it is, if you can be a source of, them processing things or having deeper conversation on what's going on and getting to the core issue of, what's going on with them. Those are two things that come to mind.
And do you have any advice on like how to approach the conversation? Like let's say you think, a friend might be suffering with depression or anxiety or maybe have suicidal thoughts. Like, how would you approach that, conversation if you were a friend?
I mean, I would just use honesty. I mean, and hopefully the good friends appreciate that. I think, you and I have that type of relationship where, if I felt that way, I could say that. I mean, it all depends on the type of relationship you have. But, I would say, as Dave, as a friend that cares about your well-being and wants to be at your best, I've been noticing you haven't been yourself. And maybe do you want to talk about what's going on?
I think most people, like, if they notice something is going on with their friends, they, like you said, be honest and be willing to actually have those conversations. But I think one of like the harder problems is sometimes a lot of times people don't really notice because there's a lot, because especially for guys, we don't have, like, for the most part, those safe spaces to actually talk to people about these things. So we mainly just, carry on with our business and don't really and just don't let it show. So I'm curious to see, like, are there like any signs you think are maybe prevalent with people that might be suffering from mental health problems? And if not, do you think, like, are there any conversations you can have just so that people feel open to?
That's a good question. I would say, I mean, obviously you know your friend pretty well, but just any signs of abnormal behavior, of, maybe they're not checking in with you as much, or they're spending a lot of time on social media when they never did, or they might be all over the place, making quick decisions without much thinking. I think those might be the signs, and it can go undetected. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people that, when I've come out of my journey, have said, I was really surprised because you're a social guy and, you're always smiling, outside in the public. But the reality with mental health is, at least with mine, was, it was my relationship with myself, and so that would never show in hanging out with friends, because I'm with you guys, I'm happy. But when I'm alone and in my thoughts, that's when, things start, I'm hard on myself, I'm having self-esteem issues. I think that's where those can show. And so, I mean, unfortunately, it's a big self-awareness game in terms of, if you're having trouble getting up, if you're not sleeping well, those are things where, I mean, we can be friends, Lando, but I won't know that. Only you are going to know that. And ultimately, only you know what's going on in your mind. So, unfortunately, it requires a lot of, self-analysis.
And I do think sometimes friends know when when things are going wrong. I think sometimes it's just a struggle to be able to kind of bring it up in a safe way. And it's also something that you never really know the extremes, because I think sometimes people think something might be off, but they think it could just be a fad or a phase. But sometimes it's a lot more than that. And it just comes to the point where, sometimes you just have to make sure that you address it, because I do think that, when you're not doing good mentally, like, every place else just starts to kind of shatter. And so I think the final kind of question that I had also was just like, coming out of COVID, what do you think the mental health landscape in America will look like in the future? What do you think we have to do to kind of make it better?
I mean, I think the good thing, I mean, not that there were many positives of COVID, but I think that people understood that mental health was a thing, not being able to, being in a semi-quarantine, pandemic, lockdown, people realized, mental health is a huge factor. Not being able to, for a lot of people, socialize or see friends, that's going to have an effect on your mental health. hopefully it gets better. I mean, there's a lot more resources. It's a lot more talked about than when we were growing up. You know, and I think it's really about, you know, all of us as individuals within our, you know, communities and bubbles being that voice of setting up time and space to talk about these things, you know, especially in the working professional world. A lot of the times that people meet up are in drinking situations, which are not conducive to these types of talks. If I'm only seeing you guys on a Friday night or a Saturday night, chances are, you know, it's an event, whether we're drinking or not, it's an event based on going to a restaurant, going to a bar, going to a club. That's not going to be conducive to being like, hey, Dave, how's your job going? How do you think about the next 2 years of your, like, are you thinking you'll stay? Like, are you thinking you'll move to a different, like, that's not conducive to that. That's why we talk about superficial things. And then, like I said, you know, in terms of, you know, as an individual, you know, with your friends, letting other friends know, like, listen, hey, I love you. Like, you mean a lot to me. Like, if anything gets bad, please text me or call me. Like, I want you to be alive. If you know it's getting bad, you know, just being that direct, making sure that they know that no, they should be here. And yeah, I mean, I think creating spaces for it, telling your friends that you're there for them, I think those two are the things that as individuals you can do.
Oh, awesome. Oh, well, thank you so much, Arnie. I really appreciate like all the insight that you were able to kind of give us into that space. And like I said, I think the work that you're doing with Grateful Living has just been a blessing to the community, because it's a lot of insight that people need to hear. But more importantly, besides like just the tips and the advice, I think what you do is you come with your real authentic self, and you come sharing your advice from you having actually gone through these things and what it is that actually got you to the place that you're at today with being able to actually overcome it. And I think that kind of stuff is valuable. If people want to kind of keep up with Grateful Living, how can they get in contact with you? How can
I add? You just reminded me of one point.
Absolutely.
So 2 days ago, I came out with the fact that I was close to committing suicide a couple years ago, out to my public social media accounts. And one of the things that I would issue in a challenge to all of your listeners and viewers is, you know, if you are the face of something, of overcoming something, whether that's addiction, whether that's mental health, whatever it is, I would really recommend, if you can, to be the face of that. You never know the power of that action. You know, for me, one of my biggest regrets with the two friends that I lost was not being out in terms of saying I've dealt with those issues. There's no telling, had I said that publicly, maybe they come to me and are like, you know, Arnie, I'm dealing with some of these issues. You know, even now, for as many people as I know, you know, I only know one other person in my personal network that has has attempted suicide. You know, I know one other person among probably like 3,000 people I've met in my life. You know, and so, you know, being the face, you never know the effect of that. One of the things that I realized after I started this Grateful Living journey is one of my friends who's a little bit more put together, who's a little bit more successful than I am, someone I've always looked up to, said to me, you know, Arnie, I probably should have told you this before, but I go and see a therapist twice a month. And you you just don't realize how powerful that is, because then that humanizes it. Then I don't suddenly think I'm crazy. You know, this person that I think never gets too high, never gets too low, been very successful in each stage of their life, they're going to therapy. Suddenly me going to therapy isn't crazy. So, you know, I would definitely issue that challenge. And the second thing I would say, and this is more to the financial aspect, and you guys have talked about this, you know, we talked about doing what's right for you, and you obviously have to figure out what that is. But you, Lando, you gave the example, I think it was in episode 1 of your podcast, of, you know, of renting an apartment on your own or living at home and being like, if you're in a negative home situation, you should rent. As much as it would be great to save the money, and it obviously is, if your day-to-day is miserable, that's going to have an effect on you, your life, your ability to be in a relationship with someone else, your friends. Obviously you have to weigh the pros and cons of, how much you're making, how much rent is in your city. But at the end of the day, I would argue your mental happiness is worth a lot more than saving $12,000. But yeah, so to answer your question, Dave, they can find the Grateful Living podcast. If you search it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Anchor. My Instagram handle is there's a Grateful Living podcast, and then I also have my personal one, Aroy81547. That's where I'm most active. But that's where they can find me. If you ever have a suggestion for a guest or anything like that, I talk to all different people, different walks of life. I've talked to someone who had an alcohol addiction. I've talked to someone who attempted suicide. I've talked to someone who lost their mom on 9/11. It's not just, quote unquote successful people that I bring on to the podcast. I like to bring on real life people because that's what life is. We all have our real life issues, and so I don't really discriminate. A human is a human. So feel free to reach out if you want to be on, or if you have a suggestion. Would love to have you on.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. People who are just grateful to be alive. So, thank you so much, Arnie.
Yeah, it was great having you here. So everybody just make sure to check out his Grateful Living podcast. The dude's a machine. He drops, I don't know, I've never seen such consistency in my life.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Every day you drop it something. So make sure that, his hard work is actually rewarded. So check him out, follow him, and make sure you watch all his videos.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
Beauty.
Thank you, guys.